John Adams is my third cousin, 8 times removed. John Adams was born on October 30th, 1735, to John Adams Sr. and Susanna Boylston. He had two younger brothers, Peter and Elihu. Adams was born on the family farm in Braintree, Massachusetts. His mother was from a leading medical family of present-day Brookline, Massachusetts. His father was a deacon in the Congregational Church, a farmer, a cordwainer, and a lieutenant in the militia. Adams often praised his father and recalled their close relationship. Adams' great-great-grandfather, Henry Adams, immigrated to Massachusetts from Braintree, Sussex, England around 1638. Adams' formal education began at age 6 at a dame's school conducted at a teacher's home and was centered upon the New England Premier. He then attended Braintree Latin School under Joseph Cleverly, where studies included Latin, rhetoric, logic, and arithmetic. Adams' early education included incidents of truancy and a dislike for his master, and a desire to become a farmer. All discussions on the matter ended with his father's command that he remain in school. Deacon Adams hired a new schoolmaster named Joseph Marsh, and his son responded positively. Adams later noted that as a child I enjoyed perhaps the greatest of blessings that can be bestowed upon men, that of a mother who was anxious and capable to form the characters of her children. Adams was raised in the Congregational Church. In Quincy, the Unitarian fraction was dominant and included Adams and his father. It was a new force in the colonies and denied the Trinity and the divinity of Jesus Christ. It was opposed by the Calvinist fraction that was Trinitarian and emphasized Christ as the Savior. Finally, in 1825, the Unitarians split off as a separate denomination that included John and Abigail Adams. Adams always felt pressured to live up to his heritage. His family was descended from Puritans. Strict Puritanism had profoundly shaped New England's culture, laws, and traditions. By the time of his birth, no one called themselves Puritans, and all of the old severe practices were gone. Adams did praise the historical Puritans as bearers of freedom, a cause that still had a holy urgency. At age 16, Adams entered Harvard College in 1751, studying under Joseph Mayhew. As an adult, Adams was a keen scholar, studying the works of ancient writers such as Thucydides, Plato, Cicero, and Tacitus in their original languages. Though his father expected him to be a minister, after his 1755 graduation with an A.B. degree, he taught school temporarily in Worcester while pondering his permanent vocation. In the next 4 years, he began to seek prestige, craving honor and reputation, and more difference from his fellows, and was determined to be a great man. He decided to become a lawyer, writing his father that he found among lawyers noble and gallant achievements, but among the clergy the pretended sanctity of some absolute dunce. He had reservations about his self-described trumpery and failure to share the happiness of his fellow men. In 1756, Adams began reading law under James Putnam, a leading lawyer in Worcestershire. In 1758, he earned an A.M. from Harvard, and in 1759 was admitted to the bar. He developed an early habit of writing about events and impressions of men in his diary. This included James Otis Jr.'s 1761 legal argument challenging the legitimacy of British writs of assistance, allowing the British to search a home without notice or reason. Otis's argument inspired Adams to the cause of the American colonies. In 1763, Adams explored various aspects of political theory in 7 essays written for Boston newspapers. He offered them anonymously under the pen name Humphrey Poljagger, and in them ridiculed the selfish thirst for power he perceived among the Massachusetts colonial elite. Adams was initially less well known than his older cousin Samuel Adams, but his influence emerged from his work as a constitutional lawyer, his analysis of history, and his dedication to republicanism. In 1759, he met 15-year-old Abigail Smith, his third cousin, through his friend Richard Cranch, who was courting Abigail's older sister. Adams initially was not impressed with Abigail and her 2 sisters, writing that they were not fond, nor frank, nor candid. In time, he grew close to Abigail, and they were married on October 25th, 1764. Despite the opposition of Abigail's mother, they shared a love of books and proved honest in their praise and criticism of each other. After his father's death in 1761, Adams had inherited a 9.5-acre farm and a house where they lived until 1783. John and Abigail had 6 children. Abigail, in 1765, future President John Quincy Adams in 1767, Susanna in 1768, Charles in 1770, Thomas in 1772, and Elizabeth in 1777. Susanna died when she was 1 year old, while Elizabeth was stillborn. All 3 of his sons became lawyers. Charles and Thomas were unsuccessful, became alcoholics, and died before old age, while John Quincy excelled and launched a career in politics. George Washington was elected as America's first president in 1788, and John Adams was elected as vice president. One of the main roles of the vice president is to serve as president of the Senate, where he got to cast a vote whenever there was a tie. He ended up casting over 30 critical votes to break ties. His vote secured D.C. as the capital, and another vote helped avoid another war with Britain by supporting Jay's Treaty, which helped establish good relations between Britain and the U.S. He agreed with Washington on policy issues and supported Alexander Hamilton's financial plan for the country. In 1770, Adams agreed to represent the British soldiers on trial for killing 5 civilians In what became known as the Boston Massacre, he justified defending the soldiers on the grounds that the facts of a case were more important to him than the passionate inclinations of the people. He believed that every person deserved a defense, and he took the case without hesitation. During the trial, Adams presented evidence that suggested blame also lay with the mob that had gathered, and that the first soldier who fired upon the crowd was simply responding to the way anyone would faced with a similar life-threatening situation. The jury acquitted 6 of the 8 soldiers, while 2 were convicted of manslaughter. Reaction to Adams' defense of the soldiers was hostile, and his law practice suffered greatly. However, his actions later enhanced his reputation as a courageous and generous and fair man. That same year, Adams was elected to the Massachusetts Assembly and was one of the 5 to represent the colony at the First Continental Congress in 1774. When Congress created the Continental Army in 1775, Adams nominated George Washington of Virginia as its commander-in-chief. In May 1776, Congress approved Adams' resolution proposing that the colonies each adopt independent governments. He wrote the preamble to this resolution, which was approved on May 15th, setting the stage for the formal passage of the Declaration of Independence. On June 7, 1776, Adams seconded Richard Henry Lee's resolution of independence and backed it passionately until it was adopted by Congress on July 2, 1776. Congress appointed Adams along with Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Robert R. Livingston, and Roger Sherman to draft the Declaration. Jefferson would write the first draft, which was approved on July 4th. Adams was soon serving on as many as 90 committees in the fledgling government, more than any other congressman. And in 1777 he became head of the Board of War and Ordnance, which oversaw the Continental Army. In 1779, Adams was one of the American diplomats sent to negotiate the Treaty of Paris, which brought an end to the Revolutionary War. After the war, Adams remained in Europe, and from 1784 to 1785, he arranged treaties of commerce with several European nations. In 1785, he became the first U.S. minister to England. Throughout the first half of 1776, Adams grew increasingly impatient with what he perceived to be the slow pace of declaring independence. He kept busy on the floor of the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia, helping push through plan to outfit armed ships to launch raids on enemy vessels. Later in the year, he drafted the first set of regulations to govern the Provisional Navy. Adams drafted the preamble to the Lee Resolution of colleague Richard Henry Lee. He developed a rapport with Delegate Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, who had been slower to support independence by early 1776. But by early 1776, he agreed that it was necessary. On June 7, 1776, Adams seconded the Lee Resolution, which stated that the colonies were free and independent states. Prior to independence being declared, Adams recognized and selected a committee of 5 charged with drafting a Declaration of Independence. He chose himself, Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Robert R. Livingston, and Roger Sherman. Jefferson, through Adams, should write the document, but Adams persuaded the committee to choose Jefferson. Many years later, Adams recorded his reasoning to Jefferson. Reason first, you are a Virginian, and a Virginian ought to appear on the head of this business. Reason second, I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular. You are very much otherwise. Reason third, you can write 10 times better than I can. Adams was sworn into office as the nation's second president on March 4th, 1797. He followed Washington's lead in using the presidency to exemplify Republican values and civic virtue, and his service was free of scandal. Adams spent much of his term at his Massachusetts home, Peacefield, preferring the quietness of domestic life to business at the Capitol. He ignored the political patronage and office-seeking which other office holders utilized. Historians debate the wisdom of his decision to retain Washington's cabinet in light of its loyalty to Hamilton. The Hamiltonians who surrounded him, Jefferson should remark, are only a little less hostile to him than to me. Although aware of Hamilton's influence, Adams was convinced that their retention ensured a smoother succession. Adams maintained the economic programs of Hamilton, who regularly consulted with key cabinet members, especially the powerful Treasury Secretary Oliver Wolcott Jr. Adams was in other respects quite independent of his cabinet, often a decision despite opposition from it. Hamilton had grown accustomed to being regularly consulted by Washington. Shortly after Adams was inaugurated, Hamilton sent him a detailed letter filled with policy suggestions for the new administration. Adams dismissively ignored it. During Adams' presidency, a war between the French and the British was causing political difficulties for the United States. Adams' administration focused its diplomatic efforts on France, whose government has suspended commercial relations. Adams sent 3 commissioners to France, but the French refused to negotiate unless the United States agreed to pay what amounted to a bribe. When this became public knowledge, the nation broke out in favor of war. However, Adams did not call for a declaration of war, despite some naval hostilities. By 1800, this undeclared war had ended, and Adams had become significantly less popular with the public. He lost his re-election campaign in 1880 with only a few less electoral votes than Jefferson, who became president. Adams resumed farming at Peacefield in Quincy, Massachusetts, and also began work on an autobiography. The work had numerous gaps and was eventually abandoned and left unedited. Most of Adams' attention was focused on farm work. He regularly worked around the farm, but mostly left manual labor to hired hands. His frugal lifestyle and presidential salary had left him with a considerable fortune by 1801. In 1803, Bird, Savage, and Bird, the bank holding his cash reserves of about $13,000, collapsed. John Quincy resolved the crisis by buying his properties in Weymouth and Quincy, including Peacefield, for $12,800. During his first 4 years of retirement, Adams made little effort to contact others, but eventually resumed contact with old acquaintances such as Benjamin Waterhouse and Benjamin Rush. Adams generally stayed quiet on public matters. He did not publicly denounce Jefferson's actions as president, believing that instead of opposing systematically any administration, running down their character and opposing all their measures, right or wrong, we ought to support every administration as far as we can in justice. Adams never owned a slave and declined on principle to use slave labor, saying, "I have, through my whole life, held the practice of slavery in such abhorrence that I have never owned a Negro or any other slave, though I have lived for many years in time when the practice was not disgraceful, when the best men in my vicinity thought it not inconsistent with their character, and when it has cost me thousands of dollars for the labor and subsistence of free men, which I might have saved by the purchase of Negroes at times when they were very cheap." Before the war, he occasionally represented slaves in suits for their freedom. Adams generally tried to keep the issue out of national politics because of the anticipated Southern response during a time when unity was needed to achieve independence. Abigail died of typhoid on October 28, 1818, at their Quincy home, Peacefield. The year 1824 was filled with excitement in America, featuring a four-way presidential contest that included John Quincy. The Marquis de Lafayette toured the country and met with Adams, who greatly enjoyed Lafayette's visit to Peacefield. Adams was delighted by the election of John Quincy to the presidency. The results became official in February 1825 after a deadlock was decided in the House of Representatives. He remarked, "No man who ever held the office of president would congratulate a friend on obtaining it." On July 4, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence, Adams died of a heart attack at Peacefield at approximately 6:20 p.m. His last words included an acknowledgement of his longtime friend and rival, Thomas Jefferson, survives. Adams was unaware that Jefferson had died several hours before. At 90, Adams was the longest-lived U.S. president until Ronald Reagan surpassed him in 2001. John and Abigail Adams crypt at United First Parish Church in Quincy, Massachusetts, also contains the bodies of John Quincy and Louisa Adams.